What's happening, guys? This is Carl, and you're listening to another episode of Not Just Another Basketball Show. Like I'd mentioned in the last episode, this week we'll be talking about the teams that's on the cuff of our traditional 16-team NBA playoffs. So, of course, with the recent announcement that there'll be 22 teams featuring in the NBA's resumption of the season, we'll be discussing more in depth about them 6 teams. Of course, 5 out west and 1 out east. We'll be going through the biggest questions around these teams, players with a point to prove, potential drama and beef on the background of some of these teams, and just kind of discussing how they've got to this position on the back of their performances and the storyline of their seasons so far. So just before we get into discussing them 6 teams, we're going to have a look around the league and discuss some of the more recent news in the last couple of days. So, of course, the biggest story being the resumption of the league. But as we've discussed, some of the other news included Kyrie Irving officially ruling himself out of this NBA's postseason. So, there's a few ways of looking at this announcement. It was interesting to see that he had announced it literally hours after KD had ruled himself out of the postseason. But like I discussed in the last episode, we seen that coming with KD's announcement. Without going into it too much, he's after coming off the back of 2 serious injuries, and he, from his perspective, he wouldn't want to rush into that again and potentially risk sitting out for another season. So, is there an ulterior motive for Kyrie announcing on the same day? Now, I would be of the believer that he announced it just coincidentally with KD. Now, of course, they would be in close discussion, in close communication when it came to this. But I suppose it's only a few days after the announcement of the league resuming. There has been questions around if the league was to resume in the likes of July, August, September, would that benefit the Brooklyn Nets in having the 2 All-NBA duo come back? But so when you look at it that way, it does make sense that they would announce that, get it out of the way, and not leave it as a hanging question going into the postseason. But of course, Kyrie coming off the back of shoulder surgery, it's understanding as to why he would sit out in a certain sense. Now, I think in normal circumstances, if you put him back in Brooklyn or maybe even as far back as Cleveland, would he come back sooner rather than later? And even in a sense that if KD was healthy, would he be coming back this postseason? So there is a few ways of looking at it. He is, of course, a bit of a polarizing figure in the NBA world, and he has drawn some criticism in recent years with how everything happened in Boston, and even this season, like with kind of a lot of stories that came out of the locker room with his treatment of Spencer Dinwiddie, and of course the soundbite of having GT, Garrett Temple, somebody that we didn't even think had, what I'd say, that much exposure. Not exposure per se, but wouldn't have been as close to players like Kyrie as one would imagine. But it is interesting to think that would Kyrie have came back if KD was fit to come back? Because now this is kind of leaving the Brooklyn Nets in a situation where, of course, they've been without KD all year. Kyrie has been in and out of lineups with injuries, and actually early in the season just kind of going off the grid for a bit. They've had the drama with Kenny Atkinson and the noise coming out of Brooklyn Nets that there wasn't a leader and that he wasn't kind of being as tough on the players as KD and Kyrie would have expected. And of course that would have led to Kenny Atkinson leaving the position by mutual agreement. Now, that is, of course, going to leave the Brooklyn Nets in a bit of a sticky situation going into the postseason. But they wouldn't have expected to be in the postseason not having KD in the lineup. And of course, when you look at it on paper, they didn't have Kyrie for an awful lot of that. So the fact that they finished in the 7th seed is pretty impressive, regardless of how weak or anything got to do with the Eastern Conference this season. Now, what does that lead to down the line? So, of course, there has been noise and a bit of tension with the likes of Spencer Dinwiddie and Caris LeVert earlier in the season. And even when you look back to when Kyrie and KD had signed with the Brooklyn Nets, they kind of got DeAndre Jordan in there as, oh, this is my friend, give him a contract as well. I don't think anybody would have expected DeAndre Jordan to get a 4-year deal in Brooklyn, especially off the back of his last couple of years. He wasn't all that impactful in New York, and I don't know, it did kind of come as a little bit of a surprise to the NBA world. But what's their identity now going into this postseason? How motivated is players like Spencer Dinwiddie and Caris LeVert going to be going into this postseason, and even talking about the off season going into next? Because Kyrie hasn't made a very happy environment to be in now in Brooklyn. Of course, it's the complete opposite of the way it was last year when they had the likes of D'Angelo Russell and Jared Dudley, and they'd made the playoffs. It was kind of this, they were a fun team to watch. They were a happy team. All their antics on the bench. To this year, when there's kind of a lot of rumblings and noise coming out of not even just the locker room, but it's kind of just been this dark cloud since Kyrie and KD has arrived there. So would Spencer Dinwiddie and Caris LeVert be playing in a way that, okay, they can take it a professional route and say we're in the playoffs, we need to play our hardest like any player would? Or are they kind of looking at this and saying, well, who's to say I'm going to be here next year? Like Spencer Dinwiddie, he's been a phenomenal player this year and was a big surprise even in Kyrie's absence. But he doesn't seem like a player that Kyrie and KD want around for the long term. So he may have a lack of motivation now going into this postseason. And of course, we had this whole GoFundMe story with Spencer in the last couple of weeks, and let the fans choose what team he goes to if the GoFundMe project was fulfilled. Of course, it wasn't, but I don't know. The Brooklyn Nets are in an interesting spot at the moment, and them going into this postseason now without obviously 2 All-NBA caliber players and KD and Kyrie, I don't know. They could be a team to watch, not for the good reasons of kind of making a deep playoff run, but I'd expect them to be one of the early teams to be eliminated. Maybe not even make it past the play-in tournament. And moving on from that, there's been news in the past 24 hours that there could be a potential replacement player system going into this resumption of the NBA season, with potentially players that have become exposed to COVID-19 and have tested positive could be replaced by another player. Now, what this means is kind of all speculation at the moment. There is obviously a few different avenues that the NBA could go down with this, and I don't know, it's fun to speculate and kind of wonder how this is going to be dealt with. So, of course, like if taking examples from the English Premier League at the moment, they've conducted daily coronavirus testing, and certain players and members of staff have tested positive, but there has been days obviously where players aren't testing positive. But now if that goes into when the season resumes, it's only kind of be presumed that if a player tests positive, okay, they self-isolate for the 7 days and they're ruled out effectively. But we're not going to have that replacement system in the Premier League. So with that idea being teased now for the NBA, how does that work? So is it going to be a case that it'll be free agent players that haven't signed to any other team now? Are they going to be that pool of players for replacement? So of course you have players like Jamal Crawford, who's wanted to sign for our team all year and hasn't been picked up. J.R. Smith, Nick Young, players like this that they could be valuable pieces for any of these teams now, but is that the pool that's going to be used? Now, other ideas that are being spoken about out on likes of Twitter and in the media are, will it be a pool of players made out of the 8 teams that aren't going to be in this postseason? Now, that's the more unlikely one, because that's kind of just, that's a blanket statement. It's not going to be really fair for a team to lose their point guard and bring in Steph Curry or Trae Young to be that replacement player. So there is going to be an awful lot of confusion, and I'd say it's more going to be, it's very hard to manage if it was to kind of just that blanket pool of players that pick any, whichever you want. But it could boil down to, you can only pick a rookie or a sophomore. So of course, like looking down between the 8 teams that weren't included in the postseason, you could look at the Knicks and say, well, I lost my center, I could pick Mitchell Robinson, or I lost my 2 or 3 and pick RJ Barrett potentially. It could be the opposite completely. It could be the vets. So of course, Vince Carter at the moment was with the Atlanta Hawks and is presumed to have played his last game. But is he hypothetically going to be included in the pool of players that, if they go for the players that have been in the league maybe 10 or more years, because it's adding that veteran experience? And not to say players that have been in the league that long could be old and over the hill and mightn't be valuable, but it then eliminates that, let's go straight for the former MVP, or let's go straight for the All-Star that wasn't included in this postseason. Could it be a system that if you lose your All-Star, you can replace them with an All-Star? So, like I've already mentioned with Trae Young, a team could lose their point guard. Even if we, let's say, look at the Houston Rockets, they lose Russell Westbrook. Now, not to say that Trae Young would fit the Houston Rockets system, but they could say, well, Russell Westbrook was an All-Star. Let's take Trae Young, who also was an All-Star. And if you lose a role player who, I don't know, is like a sophomore player who hasn't made an All-Star team, is kind of just there to make up minutes, can you go out and get a similar player? So it's going to be interesting to see how the NBA manages that now going into the offseason, because there is always going to be that fear and that threat of a player being exposed to the coronavirus. And of course, if one player tests positive, there's of course going to be that risk that, well, how many other players were exposed? How many other coaches, training staff, just anybody near them players could be exposed. So how is the NBA going to manage a replacement system? And it has to be in a way that isn't going to give teams an unfair advantage, like in the way of picking somebody like a Klay Thompson or Steph Curry now to come back into a lineup that would give a team with an injury a very unfair advantage. So I think obviously we should hear more about that now in the coming weeks. That was only an idea that had kind of popped up now in the last 24 hours. So hopefully we find some more news. It'll be a new dynamic, of course, to see how that works. But time shall tell. Now with the news out of the way, let's move to the 6 teams in addition to our traditional 16-team NBA playoffs. So starting out east, we'll discuss the Washington Wizards. So, of course, the biggest question coming in now to this postseason is, will John Wall be returning from his long-term Achilles injury? So, a player that's known for his explosiveness, his quick feet, his speed, it's going to be hard to imagine a player like that can come back and be 100% the player they were before the injury took place. But he had indicated on social media maybe a couple of weeks ago saying that he was 110% healthy and he was ready to get back to playing basketball. So what type of John Wall will we be getting in the postseason? are the Washington Wizards willing to throw him back in the deep end and hope that he doesn't aggravate the injury, or hope that he's just the exact same player? Or do they go for a more, I'd say, 2020 approach and say, well, we need him for the postseason, but we don't want to risk letting him go out injured for another year, especially when they're paying him nearly 40 million a year anyways. So they could play him in a 6-man capacity and have Washington's starting 5 go out as normal and have Wall come off the bench as the primary ball handler. So of course Bradley Beal has been sensational all year, but I don't think he's going to want to give up that ball handling responsibility just straight back to John Wall. So how are Washington going to find a way to make the two of them coexist, especially on the same court? Now, John Wall could come back and, after seeing how Bradley Beal handled himself and kind of carried the Wizards for the most part, he could be happy enough to hand over that responsibility, almost like the passing of the guard in Washington, and be the secondary ball handler, be off the ball a little bit more. Or, like I said, with him coming back from such a serious injury, he could be the 6th man going into this postseason, which is not out of the realm of possibility. It's, as we've seen with other type injuries in recent years, it's most likely he'll be on a minute restriction anyways. So it would make sense to have him as the 6th man. Because even if you get 80% of what John Wall was before the injury, you're getting an explosive player who can handle the ball, make a pass any defender, and attack the rim at ease. You're getting that coming off the bench, maybe attacking the secondary units or players with tired legs. That's going to be almost like a secret weapon for the Wizards going into this postseason, something that they haven't had for a long time. Like when you look down the roster, other than Bradley Beal, they've had Davis Bertans, obviously the Latvian laser. He's been sensational all year. He's played his role really well, shooting the three at ease. They've had Mo Wagner, who has had good stints. Of course, Rui Hachimura, who's been a good rookie since the start of the season. Thomas Bryant, who hasn't been so reliable since his injury early on in the season, but did show flashes of the player he could be in the future early on in the season. And then, of course, you have players like Ish Smith, who had a good performance here and there, Jordan McRae, Gary Payton II, Garrison Matthews. You know, you go down the roster and they've all had their little moments. Of course, they've been involved in a lot of high-scoring matchups against likes of the Atlanta Hawks and the Houston Rockets. But I think it'll be an interesting dynamic now going into the postseason if they can get Wall back and he isn't a complete shell of himself after this injury. You're getting a pretty strong Washington team. And that's even without talking about Bradley Beal. Like, I think he deserved to be an all-star this year. Of course, he was the omission, but you're always going to have a surprise omission every year. You know, there's only a certain amount of players that can be selected for them all-star games. And this year, okay, obviously we didn't have KD this year. We didn't have Steph. We didn't have Kyrie for the most part. So an awful lot of people would say, well, that was as good an opportunity as any to make the All-Star team. And that was kind of what was said about Devin Booker. But he's been sensational. He's had the Wizards on his back all year. He's the second leading scorer in the league. I'd actually, funny enough, I did see a graphic that he'd have to average over 60 a game to beat James Harden. But of course, jokes aside, he has been a terrific player all year. And you've seen his progress rapidly in the past 2 or 3 seasons. You know, every year he's getting better and better. He's getting more confident with the ball in his hand. What he was predicted to be and what he was for the early part of his career was just a spot-up shooter. You know, he'd sit in the corner and let John Wall kick the ball out to him. He'd shoot the three. Whereas now he's got an awful lot more confident with the ball in his hand. He's been a good playmaker in stretches, and he's a bucket. But how will Washington convince Bradley Beal to stay in Washington? Because, of course, there's been questions more so in the past 12 to 18 months of involving the likes of LeBron and AD and the Lakers potentially grabbing Bradley Beal from Washington, bringing him down there and having a three-headed monster in LA. But even if it's not the Lakers, there's an awful lot more suitors in the league for Bradley Beal, and teams that are competitive, the teams he wants to go out there and win a championship. So how does the Wizards front office convince him that Washington's the place to be for that? Because there's a lot of work that has to go into that. Now, I do believe they have a good, I wouldn't say a great, but they have a good core there of young players with the likes of, like I said, Thomas Bryant and Rui Hashimura, Mo Wagner. But they're going to need something more. They need somebody that's on the cusp of an all-star appearance, somebody that's going to be another piece. Because there's no guarantee John Wall is going to come back, the player he was. And if you get a John Wall that's maybe the second man on the roster, the third man on the roster, they're still going to need another piece there to put beside him and Bradley Beal. So if the Wizards can convince him that that's possible, that they can get something to make them competitive out east, he could stay and have a good future with them. But how realistic is that? How realistic is it for the Wizards to say in the next 2 years, right, we're going to put the pieces around you to be competitive and to be successful? Because I guarantee once his contract's up, there is going to be teams lining up both east and west for his signature. And there's a lot of teams that could do with a Bradley Beal. So it'll be interesting to see how they handle this postseason, how competitive they can be. Because I think going into this postseason now with the Wizards, I don't think it's going to be any more than just playoff experience. It'll be nice for the likes of Bradley Beal to get the experience in the postseason, a lot of the young players to have that experience. But I don't see them being very competitive. I don't see them going deep, other than maybe grabbing a few wins in this 8-game seeding period and maybe steal a game or two in the first round. But I don't see how they could go far in this postseason, and it's all really how they handle themselves. If they come in positive and at least play good basketball, then of course that's going to line things up for the off-season. But I don't know, there's still an awful lot of questions around how the Wizards will approach this postseason going into next season. And I suppose only time shall tell, but it'll be interesting to see how that dynamic plays out. So with us now being done out east, let's head out west and start with the 9th seed. Well, the 9th seed before this NBA hiatus had finished, which was the Portland Trailblazers. So, of course, we know the Portland Trailblazers had the deep run last year in the playoffs, making it all the way to the Western Conference Finals before being swept by the Warriors. But even looking back last year, like, they had convincing leads in games 3, 4, games 2, 3, and 4. I think the highest one being up as high as 18. So where they ended up this year was, I wouldn't say a shock, because I think they were overachievers last year anyways, but I still didn't expect them to be outside of playoff contention completely at one stage. Now, they did start to claw back late, like as we approached the All-Star break and things like that, but they still were a shadow of themselves last year. I thought last year they had a lot more depth. They looked a lot more aggressive. Fair enough, Dame, he went leaps and bounds this year. Like, he's been a consistently great player the past 4 and 5 years, but this year he's just taken that to a whole new level. Like, looking back at what his stats were for early in the year. He was 29, basically 29, 4, and 8, if we're rounding up. And he was in MVP contention if he had dragged them that bit further into the playoffs. Now, of course, looking at it now, they've made the postseason, but now there was arguments to be made that if he had continued his scoring at will and he was willing to put that team on his back, drag them to an 8th, 7th, 6th seed, depending on how far they had gone. Yeah, you could definitely understand them getting a couple of MVP votes. But it's not the redemption story that they were hoping for. And I don't think this postseason will be that redemption story either. When you look at where they've came this season and what they've done, they've been quite okay. Like, if you look at the squad without Lillard, CJ has done his thing. You know, he's always going to get you between 16, 20 points a season, get a couple of rebounds, a couple of assists, but he's the Robin to Batman. But I just don't think CJ and Dame is going to get a title in Portland. I don't. I think they're always going to need another piece. And I mean, that's evident this year. Like, when you're looking last year, they had players like Rodney Hood, who was able to just slot in there, play 3 and D, and he played it well. They had Mo Harkless last year, who was playing the 3 and the 4. He had obviously a good defender, can shoot the 3, has a bit of a mid-range game as well. And you look in this year, they didn't have that. They added Carmelo Anthony after a few weeks into the season, but we all know what Carmelo's going to do. He's going to get you points, and at this stage in his career, he's going to get you points when you need him to. But Carmelo was never a good defender. And when you look at him now, he's obviously still not that defender. So, wing play being the Trailblazers' biggest downfall is what's hurt them all season, and is what's going to hurt them in this postseason. They have good pieces there. Like, of course, they have Zach Collins, who I still believe is a good prospect when he can stay fit. Hassan Whiteside has been surprisingly playing well for Portland this year. They have Nasir Little, who I wasn't too high on him coming into the season and even coming into the draft. Now, he hasn't got an awful lot of minutes to prove what he's about this year, but even he has looked unconvincing at stages. And similar to the Wizards, I just think it's not very promising going into the postseason. Obviously, there was news over the last few weeks, Dame coming out and saying that, well, he didn't want to be in this and he wasn't going to play if Portland weren't going to the playoffs. But you can't help but just question how Portland are going to get over the hump. I think last year was their best opportunity. The Warriors were obviously at their end, and now when you look at the Western Conference Finals, you know, they are without KD. They still had a healthy Clay, a healthy Steph, but that was the best opportunity to beat them. And like I said, they had convincing leads in game 2, 3, and 4. That even if they had stolen a game, like, who's to say that series could have been different? So I don't know where they go from here. Of course, they'll have Yusuf Nurkic back in the postseason, but I still don't think that's enough. Like, you're looking at it, you could be potentially looking at a starting 5 of Dame, CJ, Carmelo, Nurkic probably at the 4, I'd suspect, and Hassan Whiteside at the 5. But where's the defending? I mean, Hassan Whiteside's a good post defender and he's a good rebounder of the ball, but Nurkic's not a great defender. Carmelo can't defend. CJ's not a great defender, and Okay, Dame can get a steal here and there, but he's not a good defender. So they can score at will. But I mean, all great teams have defense in their capabilities, and the Trailblazers don't. So I think it'll be a short run in this postseason. I think the front office and probably Dame loves Portland. Nobody can question that. He does. He loves the city. He loves the fans. But if he's out there for a ring, and I mean solely just a ring, regardless of all loyalty to Portland, and obviously money, because of course he'd be eligible for that Supermax. But if he wants a ring, he's going to have to leave Portland. I don't see at this stage how they can make Portland more competitive and how they can get over that hump. So I think it's a case of it's going to just be a run through this postseason, and probably I think it's going to be the same old story until they trade CJ or Dane decides to leave, or we could be looking at this story for the next 2, 3, 4 years. I don't see Portland winning a title with Dame Lillard and CJ as the two main guys. So it'd be interesting to see how they perform in this postseason and how they act going into this offseason, but I don't think it'll be anything special. So we moved down to the 10th seed, who was the New Orleans Pelicans. And what's there to say about the New Orleans Pelicans that hasn't been said already? For a team that started off absolutely atrociously, like when we go back to where they were after the draft, I'd go back to the draft lottery, because as soon as they got that number 1 pick, we all knew who was going to be chosen. It was going to be Zion, and you have the fanfare around selecting Williamson at number 1, and it's just all the media hype and attention, and it's warranted. I really think Zion's going to be special. He's going to have a brilliant career, but he gets hurt in Summer League, or maybe it was just a bit before Summer League, and he misses it. And then we go into the preseason, and he plays phenomenal. I can just remember him playing against the Jazz and just thinking, like, how is he doing this? Like, this is a kid just out of college, and he's playing like a vet. Like, I mean, he's catching lobs, he's dunking, he's making Rudy Gobert look like an average defender, never mind defensive player of the year, and on amazing efficiency. But then he gets hurt, he goes out. The Pelicans play absolutely terrible. Like, they were 8-23 going into 2020, and that was including, was it 13 games? Maybe it's 13 games without a loss, or without a win. 13-game loss streak. And you're looking at them thinking, what do they do now? Because Brandon Ingram is getting points. Lonzo's not playing incredible, playing okay. He's playing good defensively, getting his assists, not shooting the ball all that well. Josh Hart, who was obviously involved in the trade as well, he's not playing all that well. Alvin Gentry can't seem to put the pieces together. But then they click, and they start to get that form together going after January 1st, racking up a couple of wins. Brandon Ingram really starts to get it going. Lonzo starts to get it going. Obviously, as we know, Ingram got the All-Star nod deservedly. And we're all thinking, well, how is Zion going to fit into this? Is Zion going to, rock the boat a little bit? How is Brandon Ingram going to get his touches? Of course, we know Lonzo's number is going to go up, but how does that affect the players that were there fighting all year? The ones that kind of did end up trying to get it together. But as expected, Zion comes in, explodes onto the scene. His first game, first 3 quarters, doesn't play very well. Fourth quarter, we'll remember him getting them 17 straight points. And they're on in, 19 games before the hiatus, and he was 24, 7, and 2 on really efficient shooting, I believe 58% field goal. And the Pelicans looked really good. BI is still shooting the ball really well. Lonzo stepped it up defensively, shooting the ball a lot better. Obviously, his assist numbers going up with Zion on the court. And I think they really would have made a run at Memphis in the 8th seed. They were putting it together really well, good performances against the Lakers and the Bucks. Zion looked incredible. But then having that partnership of almost like a trio of Zion, Lonzo, BI, you have role players like JJ Redick, Derek Favors playing well. You have Josh Hart coming off the bench and playing his role. And that's even without Drew Holiday. Drew Holiday's been a defensive monster all year. And I thought he played quite well when there was nobody else really there. BI had shown stints at the start of the year, but Drew Holiday, I think, has been consistent all year. He has played really well. So when you're looking at them now going into this postseason, I don't think they can lose. Now, and I don't mean that they're going to go unbeaten. I mean that in the sense that if they go in here and bomb, they don't rack up any wins, that's experience. Keep in mind, they have a young core there. I think even if they had Zion Williamson, were they expecting to be in the playoffs this year? I don't think so. Because, they're after trading the franchise player in AD for a group of young guys in Josh Hart, BI, and Lonzo. Then you add into the mix Zion, who's a one and done from college. You add in Nickeil Alexander-Walker. You get Nicolo Melli, who's a bit on the older side, but technically a rookie. You add in JJ Redick, who is a vet, but first year in the team. So you have this whole brand new core. But yeah, here we are. They're making a march towards the 8th seed in the West, who I think actually would have made it a good series against the Lakers if they had made it there. I think it's going to be win-win. Because like I said, even if they lose every game they play, if they don't play well, it's experience for that young core. The young core that expect to be in New Orleans now for the coming years, going forward. But let's say it's the opposite. Let's say they put it together like I really think they will. That's going to be a scary thought. Because you have a young core there that could potentially go head-to-head with big teams like the Bucks, like the 76ers, like the Clippers, like the Lakers. And I definitely think they'll look competitive out there. So, who's to say how deep the Pelicans can go? I really think they can. I'm not saying they're going to be contenders. But can you really go wrong with a young core going into a postseason like this? Especially when you have big potential. So, obviously knowing that next year they're going to have JJ Redick again, who's been an unbelievable veteran in his whole career, and I think he's going to be really good for them young guys. Then, obviously, Drew Holiday, he's going to be a good mentor for them young guards and for players on the defensive side of the ball. They're going to have the young core. BI is going to be a year older and coming off the back of an all-star appearance. You're going to have Zion, who's just wanted to dig deep into his first season, his first postseason. Same with Lonzo. That's really going to be a team for the future. And I think any doubts that people may have, or any doubts that maybe surround this team, they'll be quickly put to bed. I think they're one of the most exciting teams in the NBA, and I think they're going to be one of the biggest teams in the NBA for years to come. And I suppose just before I finish up on the Pelicans, it's it's incredible how JJ makes it work. He's never missed the playoffs in his entire NBA career. And I can just remember a soundbite from early in the year saying that like he hates saying it, but he's never missed it. And obviously saying to Zion in his own podcast that don't mess this up for me, but I think it's great. Like JJ's terrific player, terrific role model, great person. So it's good to see history continue there as well. And I really think they're going to be a successful team going forward. Moving on from New Orleans, we move to the 11th seed now, who were the Sacramento Kings. So the Sacramento Kings, if we're looking back at where they've come from, and especially just this core of guys, they were a young team. They're exciting. They're quick. I thought they played very well last year. And then this year happened. Luke Walton joined as head coach and just, in my opinion, ruined a good thing. He broke something that wasn't broken. Or he tried to fix something that wasn't broken. For a team that was known for their quickness, their pace, going from coast to coast, especially with the Aaron Fox at the point, he really did just kind of put his own mark on the team when it didn't really need to be. I think he was inheriting a young core that he could have kind of let them dictate the style that they played, because he's coming into a team that had been relatively successful for a young core that hadn't had any expectations. So he could have came in and let them do their thing for a year or two, kind of slowly bring his own system if needs be, adapt to his situation. But rather than doing that, he came in and he kind of slowed everything up. So now you're looking at a team that aren't even playing to their strengths. Now, they did play quite well in the run into the hiatus. And they've even shown moments throughout the season that they're kind of a good team and that they're an exciting team. But like, they have a young core of De'Aaron Fox, Marvin Bagley, Rashawn Holmes, among others. And I think Luke Walton kind of sullied that a little bit. And even aside from Luke Walton, you have the recent news of potential beef between De'Aaron Fox and Marvin Bagley after, I think, listen to another podcast that I'm interested in, Through the Wire. They kind of worded in a way that Marvin Bagley's dad is a LeVar Ball type without the famous kids and without the personality, but he's still that or without the presence, but he's still all for his son's success and speaking out against other players and other people in the NBA world. But apparently it said something about De'Aaron Fox and basically saying he didn't like De'Aaron Fox's style. And now De'Aaron Fox hit back at him on social media and said, "This clown," called Marvin Bagley's dad a clown. And now the two of them followed each other on social media. Now, that can be looked into as, that's, how often have we seen that in the sports world where teammates will unfollow each other or there'll be a bit of bickering. But it's not really too good of a situation for a team that haven't been perfect and haven't really had the best scenario since the start of the season. Marvin Bagley himself, like, he was chosen over Luka Doncic in the draft and has struggled with injury since. Now, obviously not being his fault that he suffered with injury, but you don't need anything else to be working against you. He's obviously wanting to just get back on the court and play his basketball and prove people wrong. But then you have your dad causing problems for you with your co-star your co-star for the future. So what do you do with that now? Like, does the head coach, like, does the coach step in and try and mediate this? Does the GM try and mediate this? If it doesn't fix itself, what do you do with that young core? Because I mean, Buddy Hield, he's spoke quite freely about his unhappiness in Sacramento. Then you have De'Aaron Fox, who I don't think he'd want part of this now. And especially he's proven his worth in the last couple of years. Marvin Bagley, for a player that had a lot of potential, yeah, like he's suffered with injury. We haven't really seen a lot of him since he was drafted. And now you have this. So what does Sacramento do now? Because there's kind of more cons to their franchise than there is pros. So it's very hard to imagine how they can fix that. It's an interesting case for Sacramento, because I think a team that, if Luke Walton had inherited that young core and let them just kind of play themselves, slowly make his mark, obviously things like injuries and and confrontation you have no control over, but they would have been a good team. They would have been a really exciting team. Like, you're looking at pieces like Nemanja Bjelica, he's played quite well this year. I remember his dagger against the Rockets early in the year. Rashawn Holmes played his role very well. Like I said, Marvin Bagley has the potential, but we still haven't quite seen that just yet. He is back from injury going into this postseason now, so it'll be interesting to see how he performs in his first stint, and actually the Kings' first stint now in a postseason in nearly 15 years. But I think there's an awful lot of doubts and a lot of question marks around this team, and deservedly so. So let's see what they do. Again, with these young cores, I don't think they can really go wrong. Like, even if they lose, it's experience. But I just think it's a little bit different for Sacramento at the moment with everything else that's going on. It's how is the franchise and the front office going to address these situations and make it work, not just for this postseason, but for the seasons coming. Because they would have hoped that they had this young core now for the future. But with everything else going on, do you blow it up? Do you hope for something else and start it again? But that's easier said than done, and we'll wait and see how they adapt in this postseason and how they manage things in the off-season. Now, heading into our second last team now is the San Antonio Spurs, who is no stranger to a postseason. The thing is will they become a stranger? It's been a streak of almost, actually, no, more than 20 years at this stage, with Greg Popovich and the Spurs making the postseason. They've had their scares along the way, including this year and last year. But how are they going to manage this postseason? And does this franchise really have a future going forward? So, as the years have gone by, and besides all the Spurs' success, they've had a strong system in place. Like, anybody that works under Pop and the Spurs franchise, they adapt to the system. They adapt to what the franchise expects of you. And when you look at it now, Pop is in his 70s, and with everything going on with the coronavirus, it's even before all this, there was rumors that he was approaching the end of his career and the end of his tenure in the head coaching position of the San Antonio Spurs. But now, when you have the health risks of that as well, what does the future hold for the Spurs? Because, like we've seen in other sports, when you have a coach that's there for so long, that kind of creates the whole philosophy of what your team is about. Who, when players respect that coach, they work hard, they become different players and different people under that coach. How does the franchise manage afterwards? So you're talking now, things are quite kind of bleak for the Spurs. They have no notable star. They have DeMar DeRozan and LaMarcus Aldridge as you could say they're two best players, but I mean, DeMar hasn't been an all-star for a few years now, and LaMarcus Aldridge is far past his best. But yet they're the two players that are carrying your franchise. They have some young pieces there, like DeJounte Murray, Derek White, Lonnie Walker. But are they going to be the players to carry this franchise? I know DeMar has a player option this summer, and obviously with everything going on, he probably will take it. But if DeMar DeRozan is your best player in 2020, you're not a good team. If LaMarcus Aldridge is your number 2 in 2020, you're not a good team. There's not an awful lot to say about the Spurs at the moment because there's not a lot of excitement. There's not a lot to talk about. They've kind of just been this team that's kind of just sailed the last couple of years since Kawhi left. Kawhi was the last bit of excitement that they had there, and even at that was just more media fanfare in his last year in San Antonio. So what do you do now? Do you treat this postseason as just a learning curve for players like DeJounte Murray and Lonnie Walker? Do you start looking at moving pieces like LaMarcus Aldridge and DeMar DeRozan? Like, where does San Antonio Spurs go from here? Because I think Pop's streak is going to come to an end, and I think he is slowly probably approaching retirement with the Spurs. They have no star, a lot of weaknesses, and then even when you look at their young core, I wouldn't have said it was the most promising. I think DeJounte Murray's a good player. His shooting is getting better. He's a great defender, good playmaker. Lonnie Walker has shown some potential this year, but I mean, I don't think they're the two players to carry a franchise into the future. So when do the Spurs decide that they're going to have to enter a rebuild? And it won't be just a rebuild of their team, it'll be a rebuild of their franchise. Because I think things are going to be a lot different once Pop leaves. And they're going to notice that. And they're going to need to probably move on to a new philosophy, a new way of thinking. But let's see how they approach this offseason. I think it's just going to be a learning experience and nothing more than that. Because I don't believe there's any future for the San Antonio Spurs at the moment. Now moving into our last team is the Phoenix Suns, who of course we discussed briefly in the last episode, but we'll discuss now more in depth about what this postseason means for the organisation, for the fans, and its young dynamic duo in Devin Booker and DeAndre Ayton. So, of course, like I says, for the fans, this is the first time in a long time where they can be excited to be a Phoenix Sun fan. They've had a young player in Devin Booker, a young sensational talent in Devin Booker for a few years now. But I think finally, after a few missed draft picks, they finally picked a good one in DeAndre Ayton. And I think that's going to be their dynamic duo now going forward. I think, regardless of this offseason, I think this offseason is going to be a great learning experience and a great developmental opportunity for Devin Booker, DeAndre Ayton, and the young core that's there. But I do believe that they're going to need a third piece. I don't believe that's going to be just them two players that's going to carry them to success. I still think they're going to probably need something of a do-it-all point guard. That's not to say that I don't think that Ricky Rubio has been a good player. I think he's played the role quite well. Obviously, we know what Ricky Rubio is about. He's going to get you anywhere of around 10 points a game. He's a great playmaker, good defender. But there's something lacking there. Now, Ricky Rubio has been a consistent point guard as long as he's been in the league. Really, really good playmaker. Really do appreciate his playmaking. But if we're talking about something that's going to take them over the hump, you have to look at the point guard position. And I don't know who that point guard is that they potentially bring in, but it has to be something a bit more explosive than what Ricky Rubio has to offer. Saying that, I think as long as the Phoenix Suns don't want to move too quickly towards success and they want just like the Devin Booker and DeAndre Ayton to grow and obviously get that chemistry a bit more with DeAndre Ayton missing a good chunk of the season through suspension, I think they can definitely nurture that duo. And if they can bring in a third piece naturally, obviously through free agency or whatever the draft may hold in the future, it'll be good for them. And I really think there's potential for success there. When you look at what they have to offer now going into this offseason, they have good role players in Kelly Oubre, who's been quite a good role player all year. Good shooter, gets to the rim remarkably. The way he throws down aggressively every time, and we've seen that in Phoenix and in Washington. Then you go to the 5 and you have Aaron Baines, who he's really a do-it-all 5. He can shoot the ball, he can rebound the ball, gets to the rim, a good defender. Then looking down the lineup, it's Dario Saric, who can be good at spells. I think his best years are probably behind him, but this year he's played his role quite well. You have Cam Johnson and Ty Jerome, who are young players. Definitely room for potential with them players. Ty Jerome hasn't got a lot of minutes this year, and Cam Johnson hasn't looked all that convincing, but like I said, still young players, and I still think they have potential to grow there. So going into this offseason, like I've said with a lot of the young cores, it's can they really go wrong? Because even if they don't go in and win a lot of games, it's experience. It's the first time that you're going to see Devin Booker on this stage. It's the first time you're going to see DeAndre Ayton on this stage. There'll be room for them to grow as a duo and really kind of bounce off each other. I think that'd be really good for the franchise and for just to bring a bit of excitement back to Phoenix. It's long gone are the days of Steve Nash and Amari Stoudemire and having the Mike D'Antoni 7 seconds or less. So I think this is really the time now for the Phoenix Suns to change. But it all depends on how their front office manages it. Because, of course, we've seen how their front office can slip up on draft picks and not be aggressive enough in free agency. So if they can make the move that they need to help Devin Booker and DeAndre Ayton, and if Monty Williams gives them that opportunity to grow together, I don't think you can put a ceiling on what they could be. Like I said, they still need to change a few things, but if they can make them changes, they could really be a force out west. And with that young core, they could do whatever they want. So I'm really excited to see what they have to offer going into this postseason and what they have going forward in years to come. So guys, that'll be all from me for today. I want to thank every single one of you who have tuned in to listen to this podcast and everyone that's reached out, shown me support in the last few days. It's been really surprising and really good to see. This has been something that I've wanted to do now for the last few months, and I feel good to finally have it off the ground. Again, I just want to thank everyone who has tuned in, listened, sent me a text, shown support. I really do appreciate it. Like I said the last episode, it's nothing too serious. It's just something for a bit of fun, something for a hobby. But I think it's going to be an exciting few weeks ahead until the season resumes. And once the season does get back, hopefully I can bring a new dynamic to this podcast and just have a bit of fun with it. So I'll be back during the week with episode 3 of this podcast, and I hope to see you all then. So thanks very much, and see you.